There'll be in
So
the
you've
green
been
room.
listening to
Thank
DA
you
Nathan
very much.
Hochman, and we also stuck around for some of the questions and answers there for their decision regarding resentencing and their request to the judge, which we talked briefly about a moment ago with Josh Ritter. But Josh, I want to go back to some of the theme here. He talked about so many different stories, so many different things that the brothers had said, 16 lies that they've still not acknowledged. My question is, in criminal proceedings, people change their story all the time once they've been convicted. Where does that fall into the legal perspective? This part about this sentencing hearing or resentencing hearing, March 2021, so they've changed their story. People do that all the time. And when do we believe them, when do we don't, and how is it legal or illegal?
Yeah, that's really interesting because he's focused here on what are the factors that should be considered in now resentencing them, taking a look back. You're right. People are allowed to make whatever defense they want. They can put forward whatever story they want at trial. But if you are now asking us to reconsider and overturn a jury verdict, there's certain factors we're going to look at. And that's why he talked a lot about Sirhan and the precedent being set in that case and his lack of accepting responsibility, the full insight into the actions that he had taken and highlighting that. Listen, we had looked at cases very similar to this before, and that's where the problem lied. He feels that same problem exists in this case, and that's why he's asking them with this challenge, essentially, to go ahead and admit that you've been lying for this long.
It's almost like he's saying, look, this is your pathway to being released. You need to accept guilt and responsibility. And as you mentioned, reach that full insight for your actions. So in your opinion, do you think he's saying, do this and you might be able to get out of prison?
Not even my opinion. It sounds like that's exactly what he is saying. It was really interesting because he's not saying, listen, we've taken a look and we've completely foreclosed any possibility of them ever getting out. He's saying if they are willing to come clean, essentially, after all this time, I've outlined even 16 areas where you've lied and we can prove it. If you're willing to come clean about that, be honest about it, show full insight into your actions and take full responsibility, then we'll take another look at this. I thought that was very interesting because now it's kind of ball in their court. What do they want to do with it as the brothers? Do they want to actually accept this challenge?
Well, one of the things that we also heard, one of the brief questions you might not have heard, it was about a Marsy's Law brief that has been filed with the U.S. Attorney's Office where they're saying that Hochman has violated their civil rights. There are people, the opposing counsel has said there's bias, or actually family says there's bias on Hochman's part. But this entire news conference today seemed to me to be devoid of that. He really acknowledged many of the defenses, many of the Menendez family's positions as he laid out why he's pulling back on this resentencing. It seemed to me, it was very measured the way he laid this out. It didn't seem as if there was much bias at all.
No, he took great pains to say, I am bound by the facts and I'm bound by the law. And that's why we took, I mean, they went back and looked at, I think he said 50,000 pages worth of trial documents. They went back and really did their homework in coming to this conclusion and didn't just lay it out there in a brief, couple of pages. We're opposing this. We're withdrawing. We don't have the same position as the prior DA. 87 pages worth of explaining exactly why they feel this way about this case. I understand the family. They've had a complete 180 pulled on them since last November. It looked like the tide was in their favor. And now things have definitely changed.
Yeah, it definitely was a methodical analysis of the facts of the cases. And I thought what was very interesting and really inspiring, really, and so informative for viewers out here many people are very emotional about this case, but he really lays it out so clearly for people to understand the extent of these crimes, the premeditation involved. That I think is very impressive. I think he's winning a lot of points with the viewers.
Absolutely. And he took a lot of time to do it, too. He didn't skim over it. I'm sure a lot of that's included in his briefs, but he wanted this heard in a very public way to kind of maybe pull back on some of those misnomers about how serious, how pre-planned, how diabolical this crime really was, and the steps that they took even afterwards to continue to conceal their involvement. I think he felt that was important for us to all hear out of his own mouth.
Well, and you and I were talking about this as it was happening, that much of this case has been forgotten
Yeah.
and in some manner glossed over. And I'm not throwing aspersions on Gascon when I say this 3-page document. You cannot get into the details of what happened that night in 3 pages. And I think it does seem as if this motion is kind of almost countering their own position. So will the court look at that, look at the both of them, and how does this go when you start seeing this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the court is going to be really hard pressed to go against the DA on this one, because it was one thing when the defense was in support of it, the prosecution was in support of it, all the family members of the victims were in support of it, but now you've got the DA who's come out very strongly against it, and he's brought the receipts. He's done his research, 60 pages worth of just a summary of the facts of the case alone. That is going to be very difficult for a judge to say, in spite of all of that, and in spite of even the law, I'm going to make an exception in this case.
Right. Some of the pieces I'm still not clear about. We know there's the date, the resentencing hearing date of March 20th and 21st, but then there was word that those were being postponed. But then we heard Nathan Hochman say today the hearing might still happen on those 2 days. And he is asking for Gascon's motion that originally started all of this. That was that 3-page motion to be withdrawn, and then they accept his 87-page motion. How will this all play out? I mean, and am I correct in my assessment as to what happened? It's hard when there's so many details.
Yeah, he kind of glossed over that part, but he made it clear that there's still, he believes, a motion at play, that the judge has, by the judge's own action, made a motion that there's going to be a hearing. Now, whether or not that will take place on the 20th, I don't know if we're entirely clear about that, because I thought that date was being moved as well.
Yeah.
But he said more than once that they plan to appear at that motion, and that motion's going to happen. It's just their position has changed dramatically, and that the DA's office has withdrawn their motion in support of all of this. So, again, I think the way that it was left is that essentially he's now saying, if the judge wants to have this hearing, we'll go ahead and have this hearing. But we no longer are in support of a motion to have them resentenced.
We have 30 seconds left before we go to Eyewitness News at 11 a.m. I did want to ask one little thing. All of the documents that we have, all of the stuff that we just heard, ultimately, doesn't this come down to what you've said, what he said, full insight into the crimes? Because all of those facts don't really matter if they don't acknowledge full insight to the crimes. In his mind, there's no reason to resentence.
100%. He brought it back to that same point more than once, again and again. He feels that it's their failure to accept full responsibility that is really the point that he's hung up on.
Josh, thank you very much. We might talk to you again in just a moment.